The bullet tore through the saloon window behind Fletcher Sullivan, just as he pushed through the door of the weathered homestead, his hand instinctively reaching for his Colt before he realized the sound had come from somewhere down in the valley, not from the woman sitting perfectly still on the porch. She didn't even flinch at the distant gunfire, her fingers continuing their careful work through fabric that looked soft as butter in the late afternoon sun of 1879 Nevada. Fletcher had been riding for 3 days straight from Carson City, chasing a lead on stolen cattle that had gone cold somewhere near Pyramid City, and he hadn't expected to find anyone living this far out in the scrubland between the settlements. The woman's dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, wisps escaping around her face as she bent over the quilt stretched across a wooden frame. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with delicate features that seemed at odds with the harsh landscape surrounding her small house. Fletcher approached slowly, his boots crunching on the dry earth, and she finally looked up with eyes the color of summer sage. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "didn't mean to startle you. My horse threw a shoe about 2 miles back, and I was hoping I might trouble you for some water." She studied him for a long moment, her needle pausing mid-stitch. "There's a well around back," she said quietly. "Help yourself." Fletcher nodded his thanks and led his horse around the side of the house. The well was deep and the water cold when he hauled up the bucket. He drank deeply, then filled his canteen and let his horse drink from the trough. When he came back around front, the woman was still sewing, but she glanced up at him expectantly. "I appreciate it," Fletcher said. "Name's Fletcher Sullivan. I work cattle mostly, though lately I've been tracking some stolen stock for the ranchers around Carson City." "Josephine Turner," she replied, then returned her attention to the quilt. "And you're a long way from Carson City." "That I am." Fletcher found himself lingering, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. The quilt she was working on was a patchwork of different fabrics in varying shades of blue, green, and cream. Some pieces looked like they'd come from fine dresses, others from simpler cotton garments. The stitching was meticulous, each piece fitted to the next with obvious care. "That's beautiful work." Josephine's hands stilled again, and when she looked up this time, there was something vulnerable in her expression. "These were my mother's memories," she said softly. "Every dress she ever owned, from the time she was a girl in Philadelphia to the day she died last winter. I'm trying to keep them all together somehow." The words hit Fletcher harder than he expected. His own mother had passed when he was 12, and he barely remembered her face anymore. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, and meant it. "She loved pretty things," Josephine continued, running her fingers over a piece of blue silk. "This was from a dress she wore to a dance when she met my father. And this one," she touched a scrap of pale green cotton, "she made this dress herself when they first came west. She was so proud of it." Fletcher stepped closer, drawn into the story woven through the fabric. "Your father, gone too, 3 years back, kicked by a horse." Josephine's voice remained steady, but Fletcher could hear the weight of loneliness beneath it. "It's just me now." The sun was sinking lower on the horizon, painting the Nevada scrubland in shades of gold and amber. Fletcher knew he should be moving on, finding somewhere to camp for the night, but his feet seemed rooted to the spot. "That's a hard way to live, out here alone." "I manage." There was pride in her voice now. "I keep chickens, have a small garden when the weather cooperates. I take in sewing from the women in Pyramid City when they need it. It's not much, but it's mine." Another shot echoed from the valley, followed by 2 more in quick succession. This time Josephine did flinch, and Fletcher saw fear flicker across her face. "That's been going on for 2 days now," she said. "There's a dispute over water rights down at the Miller Ranch. Things have been getting ugly." Fletcher frowned. He'd heard rumors of trouble brewing in this part of Nevada, ranchers fighting over increasingly scarce resources as more people pushed into the territory. "You have a gun in the house." "My father's rifle. I know how to use it." "Good." Fletcher made a decision then, one that surprised him even as he spoke. "If you don't mind, I'd like to make camp nearby tonight, just to make sure those troublemakers don't wander this direction." Josephine met his eyes, and Fletcher saw her measuring him, deciding whether to trust him. Finally, she nodded. "There's a spot behind the house that's sheltered from the wind. You're welcome to it." "Thank you, madam." "Josephine," she corrected. "If you're going to be camping on my property, we might as well use first names." "Fletcher, then." He smiled and was rewarded with a small smile in return. He set up his camp as the sun disappeared below the horizon, building a small fire and laying out his bedroll. His horse, a sturdy buckskin named Dante, grazed on what sparse grass he could find. Fletcher had some jerky and hardtack in his saddlebags, a meager meal but enough. He was surprised when Josephine appeared carrying a plate covered with a cloth. "I made extra stew," she said. Seemed foolish not to share it. The stew was rabbit with carrots and potatoes, seasoned with herbs that made Fletcher's mouth water. He accepted it gratefully. "This is mighty kind of you. You're doing me a kindness, staying here with all that shooting going on." Josephine settled onto a nearby rock, her own plate balanced on her knees. "Besides, it's nice to have someone to talk to. Gets quiet out here." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the distant calls of coyotes. Fletcher found himself studying Josephine in the firelight, noting the delicate curve of her jaw, the way her eyes reflected the flames. She was lovely in a quiet, understated way that snuck up on a man. "How long have you been alone out here?" he asked. "Since December." "Almost 3 months now." Josephine set down her plate. "People in town keep telling me I should sell the place, move into Pyramid City proper. But this was my parents' dream. My mother gave up everything to follow my father west, and they built this place with their own hands. I can't just abandon it. That takes courage." "Or stubbornness," she smiled wryly. "My mother always said I had too much of my father in me. Once I set my mind to something, I don't let go easy." Fletcher returned her smile. "Nothing wrong with that. World needs more people willing to stand their ground." They talked as the fire burned low, sharing stories of their lives. Fletcher told her about growing up in Missouri, about losing his mother to fever and his father to the war. He told her about learning to work cattle, about the satisfaction of good honest work and the freedom of the open range. Josephine talked about her childhood in Philadelphia, the shock of coming west at age 10, the way her mother had struggled to adapt, but had done it anyway out of love for her husband. She talked about learning to sew from her mother, about the quilts they'd made together during long winter evenings. "She started this quilt before she got sick," Josephine said. "She wanted to make something that would hold all her memories, all the important moments of her life. But she didn't have the strength to finish it, so I'm doing it for her." "That's a beautiful way to honor her," Fletcher said quietly. "I hope so. Some days I'm not sure if I'm honoring her or just holding on too tight to the past." Josephine's voice caught slightly. "Maybe that's why I can't leave this place. If I go, I'm afraid I'll forget them both." Fletcher wanted to reach out and take her hand to offer comfort, but it seemed too forward. They'd only just met, after all. Instead, he said, "Memory isn't just about places. It's about carrying people in your heart in the things you do. Your mother lives on in every stitch you make." Josephine looked at him then, really looked at him, and Fletcher felt something shift between them. It was like a door opening, letting in light where there had been shadow. "Thank you," she whispered. "I needed to hear that." The shooting in the valley had stopped, leaving the night peaceful except for the wind whispering through the sage. Josephine stood, gathering the plates. "I should let you get some rest. Dawn comes early." "Good night, Josephine." "Good night, Fletcher." He watched her walk back to the house, her silhouette outlined against the lamplight in the windows. Fletcher lay awake for a long time afterward, staring up at the vast expanse of stars overhead, thinking about a woman with sage-colored eyes and a quilt made of memories. Morning came with the smell of coffee drifting from the house. Fletcher had been awake since first light, tending to Dante and preparing to head into Pyramid City to find a blacksmith for the thrown shoe. He was rolling up his bedroll when Josephine appeared with 2 tin cups. "Thought you might want some before you head out," she said. The coffee was strong and hot, exactly what Fletcher needed. "You didn't have to do that. I wanted to." Josephine sipped her own coffee, her eyes scanning the horizon. "The shooting started up again about an hour ago. Sounds like it's moved closer to the Carson Road." Fletcher listened and heard the distant pop of gunfire. "I'll need to go through there to get to town. You'll be all right here. I'll keep the rifle close." She paused, then added, "Will you be coming back this way?" There was something hopeful in her voice that made Fletcher's chest tight. "I could. If you wanted me to, I'd like that." Josephine's cheeks colored slightly. "I mean, it would be nice to know how the situation resolves with the water rights dispute." Fletcher knew that wasn't really what she meant, and he was glad. "Then I'll come back. Maybe tomorrow evening if that suits you." Tomorrow evening would be fine. The ride into Pyramid City took most of the morning, and Fletcher had to detour twice to avoid the fighting near the Miller Ranch. By the time he reached town, the place was buzzing with tension. Men stood in clusters outside the saloon and the general store, talking in low, urgent voices. Fletcher found the blacksmith, a burly man named Henderson, and left Dante to be reshod. While he waited, Fletcher made inquiries about the cattle he'd been tracking. No one had seen the missing stock, but everyone wanted to talk about the water dispute. Apparently, 2 ranchers were on the brink of all-out war over access to a spring that fed both their properties. Men had been killed on both sides already, and there was talk of bringing in the territorial marshal. Fletcher bought supplies at the general store, including a few extras he thought Josephine might appreciate. Fresh coffee beans, some sugar, a packet of needles and thread. The storekeeper, a wizened old man named Perkins, raised an eyebrow at the sewing supplies. "Got a sweetheart, son." Fletcher felt his neck heat. "Just a friend who does sewing work. Thought she might need supplies." "Uh-huh." Perkins didn't look convinced, but he wrapped everything up neatly. "You be careful out there. Things are getting mean." Dante was ready by mid-afternoon, freshly shod and eager to move. Fletcher set out immediately, wanting to make it back before dark. The shooting had intensified, and he could see smoke rising from somewhere near the Miller place. Whatever was happening, it was coming to a head. He was within a mile of Josephine's homestead when he saw the riders. 4 men on horseback, moving with purpose toward her place. Something about the way they rode made Fletcher's instincts flare. These weren't neighbors paying a social call. He urged Dante into a gallop, praying he'd reach the house first. Josephine saw them coming too. Fletcher spotted her on the porch, her father's rifle in her hands, standing firm even though she had to be terrified. The riders pulled up in front of her house just as Fletcher came thundering in from the side. "That's far enough," Fletcher called out, his hand resting on his Colt. "State your business." The lead rider, a rangy man with a scarred face, turned to look at Fletcher with obvious irritation. "This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. We're just having a discussion with the lady about water rights." "I don't have water rights," Josephine said firmly. "This is just a small homestead. The creek that crosses my land doesn't even reach the Miller place." "That's not what Miller says," Scarface replied. He says every drop counts and he's willing to pay you good money to make sure that creek stays flowing his direction. And if I refuse? Josephine's voice was steady, but Fletcher could see her knuckles white on the rifle. Let's not talk about refusing. Let's talk about being reasonable. Fletcher dismounted, moving to stand beside Josephine on the porch. Up close, he could see she was trembling, but her aim never wavered. The lady said she doesn't want to be involved in your dispute. Time for you boys to ride on. Scarface studied Fletcher, clearly weighing his options. His three companions shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward their weapons. The moment stretched taut as a wire, dangerous and electric. Finally, Scarface smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. All right, Cowboy, we'll go. But you tell the lady to think real careful about Miller's offer. Things have a way of getting difficult for folks who don't cooperate. That sounds like a threat, Fletcher said quietly. That's just good advice. Scarface wheeled his horse around, and the other riders followed. They cantered off toward the valley, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Josephine lowered the rifle slowly, her whole body sagging. Fletcher reached out instinctively to steady her, his hand on her elbow. Are you all right? I think so. God, I was so scared. She looked up at him, her sage eyes wide. Thank you for coming when you did. I don't know what I would have done if I'd been alone. You were doing just fine. You didn't back down. Fletcher guided her to the porch chair, then took the rifle and set it carefully aside. But this is serious, Josephine. These men mean business. I don't understand. The creek on my property is barely a trickle. It wouldn't make any difference to their ranches. It's not really about water, Fletcher said, thinking it through. It's about power, about forcing people to pick sides. If Miller can pressure you into supporting him, he can point to it as proof that his claim to the spring is legitimate. Josephine's hands twisted in her lap. What am I supposed to do? I can't fight them. You're not going to fight them alone. The words came out before Fletcher fully thought them through, but once spoken, he knew they were right. I'm staying. Fletcher, you have your own work. You can't just, I can and I am. He crouched down beside her chair so they were eye level. Those men aren't going to leave you in peace, not while this dispute is raging. You need someone here. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, I'm offering. Fletcher reached out and took one of her hands in his. It was small and calloused from work, and it fit perfectly in his palm. Let me help you, Josephine. She looked at their joined hands, then back at his face. Something passed between them again, that same current of connection he'd felt the night before, only stronger now. All right, she whispered. Stay. The next few days fell into a rhythm that felt startlingly natural. Fletcher set up a more permanent camp behind the house, but he spent most of his time helping Josephine with the work of the homestead. He repaired the chicken coop where one side had started to sag, replaced some rotted boards on the porch, and cleared brush from around the house to give them better sightlines in case of trouble. Josephine cooked for them both, and they ate together on the porch in the evenings, talking as the sun set. She worked on her mother's quilt during the day, and Fletcher found himself fascinated by the process. She showed him each piece before sewing it in, telling him the story behind the fabric. This one was from a Sunday dress, she said, holding up a piece of deep purple cotton. My mother wore it to church every week for 5 years. She said it made her feel dignified, like she was still a proper Philadelphia lady even though we were living in the wilderness. Did she miss Philadelphia? Fletcher asked. Sometimes, especially at first, but she used to say that home wasn't a place, it was people. As long as she had my father and me, she was home. Josephine carefully stitched the purple fabric into place. I used to think that was romantic nonsense, but now I understand what she meant. Fletcher watched her work, admiring the sure movement of her hands. You learned well from her. She was a good teacher, patient. Josephine smiled at the memory. She used to say that sewing was like life. You take all these separate pieces that don't seem to fit together, and if you're careful and patient, you can make something beautiful and whole. Your mother was a wise woman. She was. Josephine's needle paused. I wish you could have met her. I think she would have liked you. The words warmed Fletcher more than he wanted to admit. He was growing attached to this place, to this woman, in ways that both thrilled and terrified him. He'd spent years drifting from job to job, town to town, never putting down roots. The idea of staying in one place had always felt like a trap. But here, now with Josephine, it felt like possibility. The shooting in the valley continued, though it seemed to be moving away from the immediate area. Fletcher rode into Pyramid City every few days to get news and supplies. The situation was getting worse. The territorial marshal had finally arrived, but his attempts to broker peace had failed. Men on both sides were digging in, preparing for what looked like a range war. On his fourth day at the homestead, Fletcher was fixing a hinge on the barn door when Josephine came out carrying a bundle of fabric. I finished a section, she said, spreading the quilt across a sawbuck so he could see. What do you think? The quilt was taking shape beautifully. The pieces formed a pattern that seemed random at first glance, but revealed itself as carefully structured on closer inspection. Blues flowed into greens, which gave way to cream and white, then back to deeper blues. It was like looking at sky and water and clouds all mixed together. It's remarkable, Fletcher said honestly. Your mother would be proud. Josephine ran her hand over the fabric. I keep thinking about what you said about memory being something you carry in your heart. Every time I add a piece to this quilt, I remember something new about her. It's like she's still here, telling me stories. That's beautiful, Josephine. She looked up at him, and Fletcher saw tears shimmering in her eyes. I've been so lonely since she died. I didn't realize how much until you showed up. Having someone to talk to, someone who understands. It means more than you know. Fletcher set down his tools and moved closer. I've been lonely too. I just didn't have a name for it until now. Really? She sounded surprised. Really? I've spent the last 10 years moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to matter. I told myself I liked the freedom, but the truth is I was just afraid. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture that felt intimate and right. Afraid of getting attached, of losing people again like I lost my parents. But being here with you, I realize I've been missing out on the best parts of life. What parts are those? Josephine's voice was barely above a whisper. Connection, belonging, home. Fletcher cupped her face gently in his hand. May I kiss you? Yes, she breathed. The kiss was soft and sweet, tentative at first, then deepening as Josephine's arms came up around his neck. She tasted like the peppermint tea she'd been drinking, and she fit against him perfectly. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. I'm falling in love with you, he said. I know it's fast and maybe foolish, but it's true. It's not foolish. Josephine's smile was radiant. I'm falling in love with you too. I have been since that first night when you understood about the quilt, about my mother's memories. You saw me, Fletcher, really saw me. No one's done that in so long. They stood wrapped in each other's arms as the sun moved across the sky, neither wanting to break the moment. Finally, Josephine pulled back slightly. What do we do now? We figure it out together, Fletcher said. If you'll have me, I'd like to stay. Not just until the water dispute is settled, but permanently. I can work cattle for the ranchers around here, maybe save up and expand this place. We could make a real go of it. Are you proposing, Fletcher Sullivan? Not yet. But I will when the time is right. He kissed her forehead. I want to court you properly, Josephine Turner. Do things the right way. I'd like that. She smiled against his chest. Though I should warn you, I'm not an easy woman. I'm stubborn and particular, and I have very definite opinions about how things should be done. I'm counting on it." They spent the rest of the afternoon working side by side, falling into an easy partnership. Fletcher finished the barn repairs while Josephine tended her garden, weeding around the tiny sprouts of carrots and beans that were just beginning to push through the soil. Every so often, they'd catch each other's eye and share a smile that felt like a secret. As evening approached, they heard riders coming fast from the direction of the valley. Fletcher grabbed his rifle and positioned himself in front of Josephine, but when the riders came into view, he saw it was the territorial marshal and several deputies. Marshal Wyatt Brennan was a grizzled man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He pulled up his horse and touched his hat to Josephine. "Madam, sir, sorry to disturb you, but we're checking all the homesteads in the area. There was a shooting at the Miller Ranch about 2 hours ago. 3 men dead, including Miller himself." Josephine gasped. "What happened?" "Near as we can tell, someone from the opposition side ambushed Miller and his foreman. Miller's men retaliated and it turned into a bloodbath." Brennan looked grim. "This whole thing is spiraling out of control. We're trying to evacuate the isolated homesteads until we can get the situation under control." "I'm not leaving," Josephine said firmly. "This is my home." "Madam, I understand, but she's not alone," Fletcher interrupted. "I'm staying with her. We'll keep watch and stay out of the fighting." Brennan studied them both, then nodded slowly. "All right, but you keep your heads down and your eyes open, and if things get worse, you get out." "Understood, understood," Fletcher agreed. After the marshal and his men rode off, Josephine turned to Fletcher with worry clear on her face. "This is getting bad. Maybe you should go into town until it's over." "Not a chance. I told you I'm staying, and I meant it." Fletcher pulled her close. "We'll get through this together." That night, they kept watch in shifts. Fletcher took the first few hours while Josephine tried to sleep, though he doubted she got much rest. The valley was lit up periodically with gunfire and distant flames as buildings burned. It was like watching a war which Fletcher supposed it was in its own way. A stupid, senseless war over water and pride and stubbornness. When Josephine came out to relieve him around midnight, she brought coffee and sat down beside him on the porch steps. "Can't sleep. Too much noise." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I keep thinking about all those men dying over something so pointless. Water should be shared, not fought over." "You're right, but pride and fear make people do foolish things." Fletcher put his arm around her. "It'll end eventually." "These things always do. And then what? Do we just go back to normal like nothing happened? We build something better. That's all anyone can do." He kissed the top of her head. "We take the broken pieces and make something whole, just like your mother's quilt." Josephine was quiet for a moment, then said, "You're good at that, you know, finding the right words." "I just say what I'm thinking. That's what makes it good." She tilted her face up to his, and they kissed again under the vast Nevada sky, with the sounds of war echoing in the distance and the promise of peace waiting somewhere in the future. The fighting continued for 3 more days. Fletcher and Josephine stayed close to the house, maintaining their watch and trying to keep life as normal as possible. Josephine worked on the quilt, adding piece after piece while Fletcher handled the outdoor chores and kept the weapons cleaned and ready. On the 4th day, the shooting stopped. The silence was almost eerie after so many days of constant gunfire. Fletcher rode into Pyramid City that afternoon and learned that the leader of the opposition faction had been killed in a shootout with the marshal's deputies. With both Miller and his main opponent dead, the remaining parties had finally agreed to negotiate. The territorial government was sending a water commissioner to settle the dispute properly, When Fletcher returned to the homestead with the news, Josephine actually cried with relief. "It's over." Really over, really over. There'll still be legal wrangling for months probably, but the fighting is done. Fletcher pulled her into his arms. "You're safe now." "We're safe," she corrected. "Fletcher, I've been thinking. Even though the danger has passed, I don't want you to leave. I meant what I said about falling in love with you. I'm not going anywhere," he promised. "I told you I'm staying. If you'll have me, I want to build a life here with you." "Yes." Josephine pulled back to look at him, her eyes shining. "Yes, I'll have you. I want that too, more than anything." Fletcher kissed her deeply, pouring all his feelings into it. When they finally broke apart, he said, "Then I guess I better make it official. Josephine Turner, will you marry me?" "I thought you wanted to court me properly first," she teased, but her smile was incandescent. "I've been courting you for 2 weeks. That's proper enough for me," he grinned. "Besides, when you know something is right, why wait?" "When you know," Josephine agreed. "Yes, Fletcher Sullivan, I'll marry you." They rode into Pyramid City together the next day to make arrangements. The town was still recovering from the violence, but there was a sense of relief in the air. The preacher, a kindly man named Reverend Walsh, agreed to marry them the following Sunday. Josephine bought fabric for a new dress, cream-colored cotton with tiny blue flowers, and Fletcher purchased a new shirt and had his one good suit cleaned. In the days leading up to the wedding, they worked together to prepare the homestead for their new life as a married couple. Fletcher built a larger bed frame to replace Josephine's narrow single bed, using lumber he hauled from Pyramid City. Josephine finished a new section of the quilt, including a piece of blue silk from her mother's wedding dress. "I want to put this right in the center," she said, holding up the precious scrap. "It seems right somehow, my mother's love story leading to mine." "She'd be happy for you," Fletcher said. "For us. I think so too." Josephine began carefully stitching the silk into place. "You know, when I started this quilt, I thought it was about holding on to the past. But now I realize it's about honoring where I came from while building something new. The memories are part of the foundation, not a weight holding me back." Fletcher watched her work, marveling at how much his life had changed in such a short time. A month ago, he'd been drifting, chasing stolen cattle with no real purpose beyond the next job. Now he had a home, a future, a woman he loved beyond measure. It felt like a miracle. Sunday arrived bright and clear, the Nevada sky a brilliant blue that seemed to bless their union. Josephine wore her new dress, and Fletcher thought she looked like an angel. They spoke their vows in the small church in Pyramid City, with a handful of townspeople as witnesses. Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife, and when Fletcher kissed his bride, he felt like the luckiest man alive. They held a small celebration at the homestead afterward, just a few neighbors and friends from town. Someone brought a fiddle, and they danced on the packed earth in front of the house as the sun set. Josephine laughed as Fletcher spun her around, her face glowing with happiness. "I can't believe this is real," she said. "A month ago I was alone and scared, and now I'm married to the best man I've ever known." "It's real," Fletcher assured her, "and it's forever. I'm never leaving your side, Josephine Sullivan." "I like the sound of that, Josephine Sullivan." She tested the name, smiling. "It feels right." That night, they lay together in their new bed, the quilt spread over them. Josephine traced the pattern with her fingers, pointing out different pieces. "That's from my mother's first ball gown. That's from a dress she wore when I was born. That piece there, that's from her everyday work dress, the one she wore 1,000 times. And this one," Fletcher touched the blue silk in the center, "her wedding dress. And someday when we have a daughter, I'll add a piece from mine too." "The quilt will keep growing, holding all our family's memories." "Daughters, plural," Fletcher said. And maybe a son or two. Josephine laughed softly. You want a big family, I want everything with you. A big family, a thriving ranch, a long life full of love and memories. He pulled her closer. I want to build something that lasts, something we can pass down to our children and grandchildren. Then that's what we'll do. Josephine kissed him sweetly. Together. The first year of their marriage was hard work but deeply fulfilling. Fletcher took jobs with several of the local ranchers, building a reputation as a reliable hand. He saved every penny he could, and by the following spring, he was able to buy a small herd of cattle to start their own ranch. Josephine continued taking and sewing work, and between them, they managed to not just survive but thrive. The homestead expanded slowly but surely. Fletcher built a proper barn and a larger chicken coop. They planted a bigger garden and added fruit trees that would bear in a few years. Josephine finished her mother's quilt that first winter, and it became their most prized possession, a tangible link to the past and a symbol of their love. In the spring of 1881, Josephine told Fletcher she was pregnant. He whooped with joy and picked her up, spinning her around until she laughingly begged him to stop. They spent months preparing, building a cradle and sewing tiny clothes. Josephine started a new quilt, this one for their baby, using scraps from her mother's quilt and pieces from her own wedding dress. Their son was born in November during the first snowfall of the season. They named him Thomas after Fletcher's father, and he had Josephine's sage-colored eyes and Fletcher's dark hair. Fletcher held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, overcome with love and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered to Josephine. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving me everything." "We gave each other everything," Josephine replied, exhausted but radiant. "This is just the beginning, Fletcher." She was right. Thomas was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Catherine, then another son, James, 2 years after that. The homestead rang with the sounds of children laughing and playing. Fletcher expanded their cattle operation, eventually buying out the old Miller Ranch when it went up for sale after years of legal battles. Josephine's sewing business grew as well, and she took on apprentices from town, teaching young women the skills her mother had taught her. Through it all, the quilt remained at the center of their lives. Josephine added pieces as the years went by, incorporating fabric from each child's baby clothes, from Fletcher's work shirts, from the curtains she made for their expanded house. The quilt grew larger and more complex, a living history of their family. On their 10th anniversary, Fletcher and Josephine sat on the porch of their now substantial ranch house, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 12 now, already helping with the cattle. Catherine was 10, showing her mother's talent for sewing. James was 8, wild and adventurous. "You ever think about that day I rode up and found you sewing?" Fletcher asked, taking Josephine's hand. "All the time." She squeezed his fingers. "I think about how scared I was, how alone. And then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I didn't know I'd said." "I think about the quilt," Fletcher admitted. "How you said those pieces were your mother's memories. I didn't understand then how much memory and love could be woven together, but I do now." Josephine leaned her head on his shoulder. "We've made a lot of memories together, and we'll make a lot more." Fletcher kissed her temple. "I love you, Josephine Sullivan, more now than the day I married you, and I'll love you more tomorrow than today." "That's the most romantic thing you've ever said." Josephine lifted her face for a proper kiss. "I love you too, Fletcher, forever and always." The years continued to roll by in a rhythm of hard work, deep love, and simple joys. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. Fletcher took on hired hands, including several young cowboys who reminded him of his own younger self, drifting and searching for purpose. He tried to give them the same chance at belonging that he'd found. Josephine became a pillar of the Pyramid City community, known for her kindness and her beautiful needlework. The quilt had become famous in its own right, and people came from miles around to see it. She never sold it, of course, but she made others inspired by it, each one telling a story through fabric and thread. Thomas grew into a fine young man, strong and capable, with a natural talent for ranching. At 20, he married a girl from Pyramid City named Emma, and Fletcher helped him build a house on the far edge of the property. Catherine became a teacher, opening a small school in town where she taught not just reading and arithmetic, but also sewing and quilting, passing on her grandmother's and mother's legacy. James, the wild one, became a territorial deputy, working to keep peace in the region. Fletcher and Josephine became grandparents for the first time when Thomas and Emma had a baby girl. They named her Rose, and when Josephine held her granddaughter for the first time, she wept with happiness. "My mother would have loved to see this," she said. "4 generations connected by love." "She does see it," Fletcher said softly. "Through you, through the quilt, through all the memories you've kept alive. She's part of this, Josephine. She always will be." More grandchildren followed over the years. Catherine had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. James married late but had twin boys who kept everyone on their toes. The ranch house was always full of noise and laughter, children running through the rooms, playing in the yard, learning to ride horses and help with the cattle. The quilt continued to grow. Josephine added pieces from each grandchild's baby clothes, from significant events in their lives. It became too large for a single bed, so Fletcher built a special frame where it could be displayed in their living room, a sprawling tapestry of family history. On their 25th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were more than 30 people now, counting children and grandchildren, spouses and close friends who'd become family over the years. They set up tables in the yard and feasted on beef from their own herd, vegetables from the garden, pies and cakes baked by Josephine and Catherine and the other women. As the sun began to set, Fletcher stood and raised his glass. "I want to say something," he announced, and the crowd quieted. 25 years ago, I rode up to a small homestead following a lead on some stolen cattle. I was tired, my horse had thrown a shoe, and I needed water. I had no idea that asking for a drink would change my entire life. Everyone laughed, and Josephine smiled up at him from her seat. "I found a woman sewing a quilt from old dresses," Fletcher continued. "And she told me, these were my mother's memories. In that moment I saw something in her, a strength and a beauty that went deeper than anything I'd known. I fell in love right then, though it took me a few more days to realize it." "Only a few days," Josephine teased, and everyone laughed again. "Maybe it was immediate," Fletcher conceded. "The point is, Josephine Sullivan, you gave me everything I'd been searching for without knowing I was searching. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You taught me that memories aren't just about holding on to the past, but about building a future worth remembering. Every day with you has been a blessing, and I thank God for that thrown horseshoe that brought me to your door." There were tears and applause as Fletcher sat back down and kissed his wife. Josephine stood then, her voice clear and strong despite the emotion in it. "When my mother died, I thought my life was over. I was alone in a harsh land, holding on to her memories because I was afraid to let go and face the future. Then Fletcher arrived, and he showed me that love doesn't end, it transforms. It grows and changes and becomes something new without losing what was precious about what came before." She gestured to the quilt hanging in pride of place on the porch. "That quilt started as my mother's memories, but it became our family's story. Every piece represents a moment of love, a choice to keep going, to build something beautiful from what we've been given. And I want our children and grandchildren to know that they are part of that story too. Each of you is a piece in the quilt of this family, essential and irreplaceable. The celebration continued long into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. Fletcher held Josephine close as they swayed to a slow song, both of them watching their family with profound gratitude. "We did good," Josephine murmured. "We did great," Fletcher corrected. "And we're not done yet." They had many more years together, watching their grandchildren grow and begin families of their own. Fletcher taught his grandsons to work cattle and treat the land with respect. Josephine taught her granddaughters to sew and quilt, passing on not just the skills but the stories, ensuring that the memories lived on. The quilt became a family treasure, added to by each new generation. When Josephine grew too old to sew herself, Catherine took over the work, adding pieces to mark births and marriages and important moments. The pattern that had seemed random at first had revealed itself over the decades as something magnificent, a visual history of love spanning generations. Fletcher and Josephine lived to see their great-grandchildren, tiny babies who represented the future they'd built together. On quiet evenings, they'd sit on the porch of the ranch house they'd expanded so many times it barely resembled the original homestead. Holding hands and watching the sun set over land they'd worked and loved for more than 40 years. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd ridden past that day?" Josephine asked once. "No," Fletcher said firmly. "Because I didn't ride past. I stopped and I found you, and that was exactly what was meant to happen. Everything good in my life started the moment I saw you sitting on that porch with your mother's memories in your hands. You gave me a future," Josephine said softly. "I was so focused on the past, on holding on to what I'd lost, but you showed me that honoring memory doesn't mean staying stuck. It means carrying love forward, building on the foundation of what came before." "We built it together," Fletcher reminded her. "Everything we have we made as partners. That's what love is, Josephine. It's choosing each other every day, working through the hard times, celebrating the good ones, and never giving up on what matters most." They sat in peaceful silence, hands intertwined, hearts full. Around them, the ranch bustled with life. Cattle lowed in the distance, horses whinnied in the corral, and somewhere inside the house, their family was gathering for dinner. The smell of cooking food drifted out through the open windows, along with the sound of children's laughter and adults talking. "I'm glad you needed water that day," Josephine said with a smile. "So am I," Fletcher replied, pulling her close. "So am I." In the living room of the ranch house, the quilt hung in all its glory, a masterpiece of fabric and memory spanning 5 decades. The blue silk from Josephine's mother's wedding dress still held pride of place in the center, surrounded by pieces that told the story of a family built on love, perseverance, and faith. There were squares from Josephine's work dresses, Fletcher's shirts, their children's baby clothes, and their grandchildren's christening gowns. There were pieces from curtains and quilts, and even from the flag that had flown over the ranch for years. But more than just fabric, the quilt held the essence of their lives together. It held winter evenings spent by the fire telling stories. It held summer days of hard work under the blazing sun. It held the tears shed over losses and the joy celebrated in triumphs. It held arguments resolved and forgiveness given. It held passion and tenderness, laughter and comfort. It held every moment of their marriage, woven together into something that was greater than the sum of its parts. Years later, when Fletcher passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Josephine added a piece from his favorite work shirt to the quilt, placing it right next to the blue silk from her mother's wedding dress. She sewed it with shaking hands and streaming tears, but also with a sense of completion. Their story wasn't ending. It was becoming part of the larger narrative of their family. Josephine lived another 5 years after Fletcher, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who loved her dearly. She spent her final days in the room where she'd first told Fletcher about her mother's memories, looking at the quilt that had grown to cover an entire wall. Catherine sat with her, holding her hand. "Tell me again about the day you met Father," Catherine said softly. Josephine smiled, her eyes growing distant with memory. "He rode up needing water and I was sewing on the porch. I was so lonely then, so lost. But he looked at me and saw past all that. He saw who I really was and who I could become. He taught me that love isn't about holding on to the past, it's about building a future together. Every day with him was a gift." "He loved you so much," Catherine said, "and I loved him. I still do. That's the thing about real love, sweetheart. It doesn't end just because someone's gone. It transforms like the quilt. All those memories, all that love, it becomes part of who you are and who you pass on to the next generation." Josephine passed peacefully a few days later, surrounded by family, her hand resting on a corner of the quilt. Her children buried her next to Fletcher on a hill overlooking the ranch they'd built together, beneath a sky as vast and blue as the one that had witnessed their first meeting. The quilt passed to Catherine, who continued the tradition of adding to it. She taught her daughters and granddaughters the stories behind each piece, ensuring that Josephine and Fletcher's love story lived on. The ranch continued to operate successfully, managed first by Thomas and then by his children, a testament to the foundation Fletcher and Josephine had built. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the family gathered together, someone would always point to the quilt and ask about the blue silk square in the center. And whoever was asked would smile and say, "That was from a wedding dress." It belonged to a woman who crossed a continent for love, who gave everything to build a life in a new land. Her daughter turned those memories into this quilt, and a cowboy who stopped for water taught her that memory isn't about living in the past. It's about honoring where you came from while building something beautiful for the future. The quilt remained in the family for generations, each new keeper adding their own pieces, their own stories. It grew to remarkable size, requiring its own room to display properly. It became famous throughout Nevada, a living piece of history that represented not just one family but the spirit of the entire era, the courage and love and perseverance that built the West. And always at the very center, the blue silk from a Philadelphia lady's wedding dress remained perfectly preserved, surrounded by the fabric of 100 memories, 1,000 moments of love, a testimony to a woman who'd sat sewing on a porch one day in 1879 and told a dusty cowboy, "These were my mother's memories," never knowing that she was about to create a whole new set of memories that would echo through time. The love story that had begun with a thrown horseshoe and a request for water had grown into something magnificent, something that transcended the two people who'd started it. It became a legacy of love, passed down through generations, proof that the best things in life are built one small piece at a time, with patience and care and devotion. Fletcher and Josephine's story was stitched into every fiber of that quilt, woven through with the stories of everyone who came after them. It was a reminder that we're all connected, that the choices we make and the love we give ripple forward through time in ways we can't imagine. It was proof that memory, properly honored, doesn't trap us in the past, but gives us the strength to build a beautiful future. And somewhere, in the place where souls rest after life's work is done, Fletcher and Josephine sat together, watching over the family they'd created, the legacy they'd built, satisfied in the knowledge that their love had made the world a little bit better, a little bit brighter, a little bit more beautiful. They'd taken broken pieces and made something whole, just like a quilt, and that was all anyone could really ask of a life well lived.